This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.
Cheek Media Partners presents The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Presented by the law offices of Adam Malamut and Associates. Powered by InjuredWorkers.com. And driven by Jaguar Land Rover, Westchester. Now, live from the Malamut and Associate Law Studios, The Adam Malamut Show. Hosted by Adam Malamut.
And on a Sunday evening here on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT, welcome everyone into the Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion right here on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. I come right to the leader of the band, Adam Malamut, sitting in the big chair. Adam, a good evening to you, sir. Nice to have you back in studio, and nice to be able to look now with our programming into what should be a very, very busy fall.
Good evening, Krause. It's great to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you, sir.
Tonight we're going to talk about probably the scariest topic, what every husband and wife worry about, and that's divorce. We're going to talk about it in a different fashion, though. Tonight's guest is Annmarie Jensen. Annmarie is an attorney with our firm, Malamut and Associates, and she has a niche practice in mediation. So welcome, Annmarie.
Thank you.
So Annmarie, let's jump right into it. Tell us about mediation.
So mediation is an alternative to the traditional form of litigation that most people associate with divorce or separation, custody matters. It is a fairly new approach that courts are using a lot more so that the litigants, the parties involved, the family members can control the outcome rather than allowing a third party, in most cases a judge, sometimes an arbitrator, but to decide the fate of the family and the custody issues, the financial issues, anything pertaining to the transition that the family is going to go through. And I like to call it a transition because in any case where there are still kids, the family remains. It just looks differently. And so you will need to have some kind of a parameter for what that looks like and how people work together when it changes from a marriage to potentially a divorce or in some cases a separation.
So Annmarie, in preparation for the show, we talked a little bit about divorce rates. And I think there's a misunderstanding out there, or misinformation out there about the fact that half of all marriages end in divorce. And that's really not the case, is it?
It's not. So it changes. Certainly economics play into things in terms of when people feel like they're in the best position to make a change like this. We've seen lately that the most increasing segment of the population that appears to be headed toward divorce are gray-haired divorces or silver divorces. So older people where children are grown, but where the marital estate has also grown, potentially. If it's in a good way, then that makes a case somewhat easier to resolve. If it's been a troubled financial marriage, then it still remains difficult, but there are always solutions that you can come up with. And what I like about mediation is that you can be a bit more creative in your solutions than traditionally what a court or judge would do.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things, at least my perception, that drives either a divorce or people trying to reconcile is money. So when you're talking about money and when you have families going through a stressful financial period, or you have families that are maybe prospering and spending a little bit beyond what they would normally spend, it seems to create a lot of marital issues. Is that a lot of what you're seeing?
Sure, yeah. Finances might be the biggest problem that we see. Oftentimes people can't agree on parenting or just general matters of getting along. In extreme cases, there's wrongdoing in marriage. But most cases that we see in mediation, both parties come to the table acknowledging that they've both played some role in the fact that the marriage is going to change and head toward divorce. So that's what's important, is that people come to mediation acknowledging their part and their responsibility going forward.
Now, since our listener audience stretches across more than just New Jersey, I think it's important for us to tell our listeners that in the event that you have a family law matter, the laws are different in every state. So what you hear on our show today, please don't take that as legal advice. Seek an attorney. There are centers out there with this tacky advertising that say divorce center, come here and we'll get you divorced for $49. Don't buy the cheap product. Divorces are very complicated, and while we hope that none of our listeners are going through it, it really is state specific as to how things are unwound with, and you use the term marital estate, with a marriage, with assets. So that's my quick disclaimer here. Moving into all the different ways that people are able to get a divorce and separate, what do you see when people come and talk to you about their biggest concerns?
If there are kids, then the biggest concern is usually the children. Beyond that, it's their financial security. And, in some cases, there's more that we discuss in mediation than just the property and custody issues. There's a healing aspect to it, too, which I think a lot of people don't realize. But I've probably had 20-25% of mediated cases wind up in reconciliation, because in mediation, the parties are meant to communicate, listen to the other party, acknowledge some piece of what they've contributed to the downfall of the marriage. And then sometimes people realize that they don't want to get divorced after all of that. So I think that rarely happens in litigated cases because of the toxicity that sometimes comes along with litigating and the adversarial nature of that.
Annmarie Jensen is the special guest of Adam Malamut on the Malamut Show here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Annmarie is a family law attorney and mediator. And Adam, if I don't often jump in with a question, but if you don't mind me doing it, I wonder, people that are in a position to request a conversation with you, I wonder if mediation is even part of their thought process at the very beginning.
Sometimes it is. Mediation and other alternative forms of getting to the result has become more popular. So a lot of times people come to me knowing something but very little. And that's why we spend at least the first half hour to an hour talking about the process. The process is very different. It doesn't involve frequent communication with your lawyers, although I do recommend that my mediation clients have lawyers so that they can consult with the attorney when they have questions. As a mediator, I can't represent either party and give legal advice to them, but I can certainly help them both reach a solution. So they don't often know exactly how it works, so we have to go through that entire process, and it's very different than litigation.
So we're going to be moving to break in a minute. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the counseling part of our jobs as attorneys, and more specifically your job, because you're the brave attorney here who delves into the realm of family law. But the important role, because I think that as the listeners are driving down the road, listening to the show, or wherever they're tuning in, marriages go through rocky times, and I think it's kind of important to understand that, dissolution of a marriage is not a knee-jerk decision. There's a lot more that goes into it.
All right, we'll get to our first break here on the Adam Malamut Show as we come to you on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Just to emphasize Adam's point going into the break, if you're consuming any or all of the show here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT and you miss any of the broadcast, or you would like to re-listen to the broadcast, just go to radio.com, search Adam Malamut, and the show lives on radio.com 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We'll get to a commercial break. Back in a moment.
The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion.
1210, back here on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. Thank you so much to everybody tuning in on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Adam?
You know, Krause, of all the shows we've done so far, we've had some amazing guests. We've talked about some amazing topics. But this is a topic that, in my mind, is not talked about enough. And I feel like if marriage was talked about more, people would have greater value for trying to work on repairing their marriage, work on peaceful dissolutions. People, I think, lose track of the fact that, you know, at one time there was something in their partner that drew them together, and they very quickly forget that when outside forces get involved, and whether it's finances or other relationships, or, you know, the proverbial grass being greener on the other side, you know, people wishing to go back to their single bachelorette lives.
Yeah,
So-
I do think, Adam, it has to be a mutual willingness to get to that point. If both partners do not have that mutual desire to reach some sort of conclusion, or to whatever that conclusion is, there's always going to be trouble.
You're right. And, you know, it's the old, it takes two to tango. We're going to, and I'll ask Annmarie to get in on this. You know, too often we see people who have worked really hard their entire lives that have whatever differences there are. And there may not be any differences. It might be that one of the partners doesn't recognize the stress of the other partner and may minimize what they're going through at that time. And the easy way out in their mind may be a dissolution or a divorce. And then what we see is traditional, I say traditional, divorce attorneys who litigate oftentimes, and we're going to have that on a future show, oftentimes get involved and do what we call scorching the earth. They get involved and it becomes even nastier, and then it's one lawyer versus another lawyer. And at the end of the day, this marital estate, which is all of the worldly value, economic value that this couple has acquired over years of working hard and saving, ends up going in the lawyer's pockets. So that, in my mind, it's one of the reasons that I'm really proud of Annmarie's practice. There's not a lot of times in law where you can be on the right side of things. And being able to bring people together that at one time were in love and may not be anymore, but have them work out their differences, have them do what's in their children's best interest, and have them really save what they've worked for. You know, it's a great feeling, and it's a shame that they're ending in dissolution, but they don't have to end not being friends. They don't have to end not being able to coexist, co-parent. So it's really important. So to that end, Annmarie, what drove you into mediation?
So I think I approach conflict in general in life, whatever it is, with the idea that there is very rarely a complete winner and a complete loser. And rather than roll the dice with these kinds of very important life-altering matters, it's much better for people to control what becomes of them. So mediation is our alternative in the law. We certainly can arrive at settlements when you're litigating, and oftentimes they do. A lot of cases will be litigated heavily and then still wind up in a settlement. But what people have done in that instance is that they've sort of taken the funds that they may have reserved for things like their own kids' college education, and now they're paying for their lawyers' kids' college education. So you start out with one pot, the marital estate, and however many kids you have. And at the end, you're going to wind up with some results. You may have dissipated a lot of that estate and destroyed some piece of the relationship with the kids, or the respect of the children, or the ability to cooperate around the children. if you don't go through the process, I believe, with integrity. So I was drawn to mediation by the sheer fact that I think we should approach these things with integrity, with hearing the other side and reaching a compromise.
So without getting into statistics, because I don't believe, I believe that it would create a false expectation because every case is different. What are the differences you see between the successful mediations versus the divorces that you've handled, which I know that you've handled some fairly contentious divorces as well?
I have, and that may be also what drove me to mediation, seeing what it does to people and families when they go through very expensive, drawn-out, difficult divorce proceedings. The biggest difference is probably that the people come to an agreement that they both are willing to live with and abide, and they don't wind up in court again after their divorce. It's one court appearance for the divorce. No judges had to make a ruling on the issues. They've come to the terms of their agreement, and then after, when things change, they can figure out a way to cooperate, to discuss issues that arise, to talk about college applications and things that we don't anticipate always at the time of the divorce, but they don't need to litigate. There are cases, and I don't have the statistics, but judges will tell you, where people are litigating after their divorce for years, and they are still spending money, and they're still not getting outcomes and results that make them happy. So that, I would say, is the biggest thing. Once you put in place this mediated agreement and this process, it really teaches people how to figure out solutions to the problems without having to be adversarial as soon as something changes that they didn't foresee.
I don't want people to get the wrong impression that mediation is something that they can just go to the next door neighbor and say, hey, we've been friends forever. Can you help us mediate? There's a lot more that goes into mediation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think that certainly there are a lot of qualified mediators, but we're trained to come up with solutions. And the more you know about family law and options in this state of New Jersey or whatever state you're in, then the more helpful you can be. So I tend to think that lay people would give advice that wouldn't necessarily be sound. So you need to go to someone with the education and the experience in order to come up with a result that's actually going to hold up. In New Jersey, we don't have licenses for mediators yet, but we do have certifications. Our court rules provide once you do a 40-hour training, and I've done both the training in family and in civil. So there are cases that are not family related that can be mediated. Any dispute can be mediated. If you're having a problem with your neighbor, if you're having a problem with a family member but it's not divorce related, sometimes there are estate matters that people want to mediate. And so whatever the dispute is, mediation is just one way of getting to a result, and it's the way that gives you the most control about the outcome.
So how do you approach a mediation when you have husband and wife come in? They say, we want to mediate. What happens next?
So I go through the requirements that they both have to come to the table with, and that basically they are full disclosure. So in mediation, we're not hiding anything. We're not going to make anybody dig too far to get the answer that they're seeking. There's a free flow of communication. If a question's asked, an answer's given, and it's truthful. Otherwise, there's a breakdown of trust and therefore the process, because no one's going to continue to mediate if you think the other person's not being straight with you. So disclosure is very important. We also want to make sure people know that it's confidential, that it can't be used. If you sit down in mediation and say something, it's not supposed to be used against you if you later litigate. So we actually have a statute that prevents the mediator from ever being called as a witness. It's also insulates the communications in mediation from being disclosed in court, so that, again, there's no barrier to reaching the facts and then the result that it works for both parties.
And I know that you're very successful with your mediations, but on the rare occasions where people just agree to disagree, what happens then?
Well, oftentimes they're not seeing that there's maybe a third, fourth, or fifth solution. And that's where I think my experience and my creative thinking in these matters can help, because they may have thought they reached an impasse, but they haven't thought of some other out-of-the-box type of a solution. And that is one thing we can't get if you litigate. You really don't get very many out-of-the-box solutions. You get somewhat of a one-size-fits-all, whereas in family matters, I think every family is unique, and I think we have to tailor the solutions to the family.
So we come to you to mediate, and we're not able to come to an agreement. Can I just hire you as my attorney?
You cannot.
Why?
So I would no longer, once I mediate a case, I would no longer be able. I have information at that point that's detrimental potentially to the side that's not hiring me. So absolutely not. You need to decide before you see me whether you want to see me as a mediator or see me as an attorney.
So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about that. And I knew the answer, obviously, but I want to talk about the conflicts of interest that arise, and I want to get into what this mediation agreement looks like.
This is the Adam Malamut Show on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. Back in a moment.
From the Malamut and Associates Law Studios, this is the Adam Malamut Show.
And back here on the Adam Malamut Show, here on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Every Sunday on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. Tonight's special guest, Annmarie Jensen, family law attorney, mediator. Adam?
So when we took our break, we were starting to talk about conflicts of interest and I guess the rules of mediation. So you have an agreement to mediate, right?
I do. It's really more of a guideline that I like both of my clients to acknowledge. Mediation is a little bit different in that you can begin the process and you don't necessarily bind yourself to any long-term commitment. You're going to mediate if it's working for you. And in most cases, it works for people. We sit down at our first session. We immediately start to talk about some solutions. A lot of times there are immediate issues that the parties have to discuss. How are the children potentially going to be told, what they're going to be told, how the separation will look, what will happen with the finances. So in mediation, we don't even have to wait. We can leave even after the first session with a temporary plan and try it. And then we reconvene when we have more information, and the parties go out and do the things that they need to do to get the issues resolved. And then we come back and revisit. So even though it's an agreement to mediate, it's sort of a as-you-go type of an arrangement. So you mediate as long as it works for you.
So in your mediation agreement, do you find that helps to set expectations for the parties?
Yes, I do. I think it's really important that people come into it, especially because most people haven't mediated before. This is their first time using this process, and it's really important that everyone's on the same page.
So, you talk about the family unit, you talk about the marital estate. I'm the product of a divorced family. I know that we've got other folks in our firm who also have either been the product or gone through a divorce themselves, and a lot of them have children. How do you get folks to be reasonable with one another with what's in the child's best interest without the child sitting at the table?
Well, so I'm also the product of a divorced couple who are very close friends, and I am divorced and am close with my ex. So I think that my personal experience can inform how I approach these cases as well. And people can see that it actually can work. The kids can adjust if the parties are willing to work together and to abide. We have something in New Jersey called the Children's Bill of Rights, which gives children the right not to be brought into litigation, disputes, not to be carriers for information between the parties and other things. So we go over that somewhat too and talk about why that works, why cooperating and minimizing the conflict when it comes to the children is absolutely not just in the party's best interests, but in the children's best interests. And so one of the, I would say my favorite aspects of mediating is helping people figure out how they're going to co-parent beyond the divorce. They're still, in a lot of respects, going to be making joint decisions. They have to respect the fact that the other party is the parent. And if they're coming to mediation, they usually trust and respect the other party enough to trust their judgment. I won't lie and say that every case is appropriate for mediation. There are cases that aren't, where there's an imbalance of power between the parties, where there's been such a level of dishonesty or hiding of information that mediation wouldn't work. And in New Jersey, we don't allow any case with a domestic violence restraining order to be mediated, with very few exceptions in a pilot program that we're trying. So for the most part, you have people that come to it with this desire, or they learn the desire. They see why it's beneficial to have a cooperative relationship. So when I see that they come back to their second session, they've been working on their co-parenting, they've been sharing time with the kids, they're sharing maybe expenses, but they can both go to the children's events, because oftentimes in litigated cases, we have one party not wanting the other party to attend things, and really that's to no one's benefit. Most children, if you ask them, would want both of their parents involved.
How about poisoning of the well? How about, parents that are spending time with the child, telling the child how the other parent did this wrong, did that wrong? Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Well, that's actually a violation of our Children's Bill of Rights, and if it was brought before a court, someone could be sanctioned for that, the ultimate sanction being a jeopardy of your custody rights. So if you continue to poison the child or the child's attitudes toward the other parent, there's a technical term called alienation of the parental and child affection. There sometimes needs to be counseling, and I do recommend often in mediation, I recommend that the parties consider family counseling as parallel to mediation. Sometimes people think I'm a counselor, and I have to remind them that that's not my training, despite the fact that I have a lot of exposure and experience with these issues. A professional could be really helpful in changing the way people look at the relationship and how they're going to parent. And so I think counseling goes hand in hand with that.
We've talked about my excitement and pride having mediation in-house. And, part of what brought me to the idea that this is just a great avenue for people is the horror stories that we've heard about people getting divorced, and you had two good income earners, and next thing you know, there's two lawyers who both made 6 digits, and husband and wife are still fighting, and one takes the pot, the other takes the lid to the pot, and it's who's going to go to little Johnny's baseball game, and who gets spring break, who gets Christmas Eve. It's really, in my mind, an unnecessary exercise when your first jump off is to go right to, hey, let's rush in, let's hire, whoever the pit bull attorney is that drinks a cup of blood for breakfast, and start going at my spouse. And while there may be some acidic feeling because of recent months in the relationship, it's still one of those things where I feel like you've got to take a step back. You've got to kind of look at what's in the best interest of you, the person that you said I do to at one point, your children, families, right? Because a lot of times the families are involved, and the families have relationships with the in-laws, and so it gets very complicated, right?
Absolutely. And I actually would go so far as to say that's tragic. When you approach a situation immediately as an adversary to someone who either you shared years with, shared children with, shared a number of experiences with the idea that if she loses, I win, I think that that's a very big misunderstanding, because if there are kids in any respect and one of the parents is losing, then the kids are losing too. And so mediation can really help the parties realize what's fair. And sometimes that means taking ownership of what you've done wrong and maybe paying a little extra or doing something to right that wrong. Whereas our courts don't look at fault, usually in the state of New Jersey, as a basis for arriving at a solution. In mediation, I think sometimes people will acknowledge their fault, and that leads to forgiveness. And then that leads to the feeling that both parties should walk away with a fair result. And so that's really the ultimate goal, is what is fair.
You know, we represent a lot of people who are blue-collar individuals who, whether it's law enforcement, firefighters, members of the building trades, who have worked hard for their retirement pensions that they've built up, their annuities. And, you know, a lot of folks, I think, may stay in a bad situation because they're afraid of what they have to give up, or it may turn acidic because the spouse, the significant other, decides that they deserve a piece of whatever that is. How do you bring calm to that? How do you get people to look at it from a different lens rather than being, a money grab?
So what I try to do is explain the reasoning behind why our alimony statute exists, why our equitable distribution statute is crafted the way it is, and why the factors are important, so that people understand the underlying reasoning for how these cases get resolved. Even if, from a mathematical standpoint, it seems like it's unbalanced, there's so much more that goes into a family relationship than the party who happens to be making more money or building up a greater retirement. So I think if people understand what underlies that philosophy, it's a little bit easier to grasp why you're going to be sharing something that maybe you don't think you should otherwise be sharing.
We started the show talking about this being a scary topic. And, look, I think that most people are adverse to change. Most people are fearful that they're going to lose their relationships with their children, fearful of the unknown, fearful of the economic impact. We're going to take a break in a minute. When we come back, I want to talk about the importance of co-parenting and getting your mindset, if this is unfortunately where your marriage is headed, getting your mindset around the positive things that can come after a divorce.
This is the Adam Malamut Show as we come to you on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Adam prides himself when we deliver this program on delivering education to the listening audience, and I would say hands down, Annmarie Jensen, who is a family law attorney and a mediator, is bringing some incredible information tonight on the show. Back in a moment.
Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Now back to Adam Malamut.
And back here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, this is the Adam Malamut Show. Thank you so much to all of our listeners tuning in on a Sunday night, Adam.
Annmarie, co-parenting. I mean, we talked about all the terrible things that come with divorce. Let's talk about how you can actually build value in the relationships with your children by co-parenting and leading by example.
So this is, I think, the single most important topic. If you can't reach agreement on the financial issues, you can always mediate and limit the issues in dispute. So if you can reach an agreement on custody and on parenting time and on how you're going to co-parent, then that's a huge piece of your case that you can resolve. Ideally, you resolve all of your issues in mediation, but if there's one issue that I think is most important to be left to the parents, barring cases where there's neglect or abuse or unfitness on the part of you chose to have a child with this person. So at the time you chose to have a child with the person, you believed in their judgment to some extent and the ability to have a child with the person. Things can change, but hopefully through mediation you can learn and remember the good qualities about the person that led you to make that very big decision in the first place. And also, you're not going to change it. Absent an adoption or some other major change of circumstances, that person is going to be the parent of your child for the rest of their life.
So we talk about parents, let's talk about crazy parents. So we have seen some crazy parents. We've seen parents on the side of the soccer fields. We've seen parents that have had conversations with their kids that were completely inappropriate, right, where they're slinging mud at the other parent. We've seen parents try to buy their child's affection. We've seen parents who have gone to extreme measures to prove that there was infidelity, and somehow the children get caught in the middle of that. And, well, what did you see mom do? What did you see dad do? How do you deal with those types of folks?
So it's not easy. In mediation, people need to stop that craziness to a large extent. And I try to help them see why they need to. Look, I can't make miracles happen, but I certainly can impart some words of wisdom. And what we know about what happens to children and their need for counseling or psychological care for many, many years beyond the divorce. And then we contrast that with children who are well-adjusted in divorce. And those are the cases where the parties have figured out a way to allow the children to respect both parties and to have some understanding that the parents are working together. So we try to minimize the crazy and see the benefits of that. In not every case can we, and so the alternative is always litigation. But my hope is that people understand that that's not usually going to result in the outcome that they want.
So how do you guide them to the outcome that they want? So when they are acting crazy and you know that mom and dad are both struggling just to put food on the table and they're going to have to litigate because they can't get out of their own way. I mean, as lawyers, part of our job is to help people get out of their own way. What do you employ?
Well, finances is often a pretty good negotiating tool. So people know that if they leave my office and abandon the mediation process, and they're both going to have to get lawyers, there's going to be sizable costs associated with that immediately. Any family lawyer that's going to be retained is going to need a sufficient retainer up front to cover what they believe their time is going to be required in the case. And I can tell you as a family law attorney, we're assessing that. If you come into our office and tell us these are the issues, and the issues seem to stem from craziness on the part of one party or the other, your retainer is probably going to be higher. And so now it's a very expensive process. People have to borrow from their retirement assets. They have to liquidate assets. And for what? Probably a result in the end that looks nothing like what they started out wanting. And so I try to encourage them from an economic standpoint as well as a well-being, a health, mental health, and well-being standpoint, to continue to try to see what the other side's position is and why, to hear them, to listen, to give the other side the opportunity to speak and to listen to them, and then find something that works. Because either you're going to find it or someone's going to find it for you.
I feel like one of the impediments to a couple successfully resolving their differences is outside influences. Mother-in-law, sister, brother, cousin, best friend. How does mediation help eliminate those outside influences?
Well, because the parties are making decisions for themselves in the room. For the most part, we don't have third-party participation in mediation. We can agree to allow that if both parties wish to have someone else in the room, but that's only if we think it's going to be facilitative and not an obstacle. So most of the time, it's just the parties in there. Now, they may have counsel who they can call, and sometimes we have counsel in the room too. But ideally, in order to keep your costs down, you're coming to mediation with your spouse, or if it's a post-judgment issue, you're coming with your former spouse, and you're really getting down to it. And I can't tell you how much can be agreed upon, how much common ground you can actually find if you try.
And look, if you have marital issues and you go through the counseling and you try to work it out by being better communicators in the house and it's still not able to be worked out, mediation provides an unbelievable value, right?
I think so, absolutely. I don't think you'll get a better result than the result that you craft for yourselves and come to an agreement on, because we know that people are going to be more likely to abide by something if they've come to it willingly than if a judge tells them to do it. And all that will result in is more litigation.
Yeah, and on top of that, with the mediator, they're paying one lawyer. So the spouses are paying one individual. They're splitting the price, splitting the cost, and the idea is it incentivizes everybody to get this done quickly, get it behind them, and let them start the next chapter of their lives, right?
Absolutely. It's a fraction of the cost of litigating.
And with mediation, you're able to also help people with their properties and their assets and come to what really is fair, while also weighing in on how a court would handle it, correct?
Correct. That's the ability we have in mediation. We can also, as I said, come to a solution that maybe you wouldn't get from a judge. Just a quick, fun little piece of it is that oftentimes people are arguing about pets. And so we can arrive at some type of pet sharing arrangement that works really well for a lot of families. And they may have thought that they had to fight for that, and one person or the other get the animal or the pet, or in some cases it's property. But it's really nice to see that people realize that they both have an interest in something and they can walk away still enjoying those things, but it just looks a little different.
So I want to thank you. This has been a great show. It's a very difficult topic. I'm glad that you were able to come on today. I know that you had a family law matter that you may have taken your entire weekend, and you may not have been able to make it today, but I appreciate it. For listeners, again, if you have a family law matter, talk to an attorney in your state. The state laws are different. We are a New Jersey firm. Annmarie is a New Jersey family law attorney, and it is very important for you to know that what we discussed today is not legal advice, but we hope that you take it and use it to form whatever decision is best for you and your family. So thank you for tuning in, and great show, Annmarie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is the Adam Malamut Show. Real people. Annmarie Jensen, she certainly is. Well done today, Henry. Real perspective, born on her desire to help you find common ground, and real opinion based on a tremendous amount of experience. Did a great job today. That's going to do it for the Adam Malamut Show here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. On behalf of Annmarie, on behalf of your gracious host, Adam Malamut, see you next time, everybody.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.